Hey guys, it's Timothy here for the final video in this 5-part series. Thanks for joining me. I hope this has been helpful for you. It is, in fact, Modern Masters 17 release weekend. I have one draft under my belt where I ignored all of the advice I was given to people on YouTube and ended up with a 302 record, kind of a weird record with no losses but 2 draws that went in the time. But anyway, this will be the final video in this series. It is worth mentioning that there are a lot of times you end up in just a 4 or 5 color type control deck, which seems like it's going to happen quite a bit in this format, but that's a conversation for another time. We're going to look at the Jund Shard today, or as Magic has called it, or as Wizards has dubbed it, the green-red go wide strategy. This is going to look very similar to the Naya strategy, but the biggest difference is Naya was all about making larger tokens and then populating them to make a board of big creatures, whereas this strategy is more about going wide and making a bunch of little tokens and then winning with some kind of overrun type effect. And by that, if you don't know what I mean, an overrun type effect is something that pumps your entire team and kind of spreads a bunch of damage out among a bunch of little creatures. So, starting as usual with these videos, we're going to look at the Jund specific cards. The very first one, the rare here, is Broodmate Dragon, which is just an absolutely absurd card. You're getting 8 power and toughness worth of flying for just 6 mana, which in this format, flying is going to be a premium. Flying is going to help you win the game. Broodmate Dragon is extremely powerful, and it kind of matches the theme here too. It makes a token. That's about as far as that goes. But Broodmate Dragon is a bomb rare. It's something you should probably never pass if you're able to pull off the colors. Even if you're only in 2 of the colors and you see this guy come around you or you open it, you should probably stretch to try and find it because it is 6 mana. With the amount of mana fixing in this set, by the time you get to 6 mana, it should be very likely that you have your splash color. And Broodmate Dragon is going to be a real pain for your opponent to deal with. The uncommon here is also quite good. Sprouting Thrinax is a 3-mana 3/3 that requires all 3 different colors, and when it dies, you get 3 1/1 Saproling tokens. So obviously fits the theme very nicely when it dies. There's a short, there's a subcategory of like sacrifice to this that we'll mention, and Sprouting Thrinax is the perfect creature to sacrifice. It gets beats in pretty early if you can drop it on turn 3. 3-mana 3/3 is quite good on curve. Especially in this format, and being able to sacrifice this and then also sacrifice the 3 Saprolings that come off of it, or just leave those Saprolings behind is nice. Not to mention, if you just trade Sprout and Thrinax in battle, it pretty much replaces itself with 3 power and 3 toughness, spread out across 3 creatures, which is what you want to be doing, spreading your damage out as much as possible in this format. And then, or in this archetype, I should say. And then you have Savage Lands, which is your glorified tricolor land for Jund. So, as always, just want to mention the tricolor lands here. Moving on, we're going to say, obviously, what you want to prioritize here is token generators, and specifically, you want things that make multiple tokens at the same time. The populate decks really want to make one large token and then take advantage of it. This archetype, if you really want to build the quote-unquote Jund deck, the go wide deck, you want token generators that make multiple things. There are also sacrifice payoffs here, and I think people are overestimating how good the sacrifice engines are. They're not insane. A lot of them are mana intensive, but they are something that work in this deck pretty nicely, and they can help you push in the last little bit of damage that you need when your tokens aren't enough to get there. What happens with token decks is you often get to a point where your opponent just has enough bigger creatures that you can no longer attack with your tokens, and then using the sacrifice effect here to finish your opponent off is a nice way to take advantage of that. So for token generators, we're looking at simple cards like Dragon Fodder, which makes 2 1/1s, Golgari Germination, which can turn your non-token creatures into tokens when they die, Fist of Ironwood, which also makes 2 1/1s and has the added bonus of potentially giving one of your bigger creatures trample if need be. It's basically just another Dragon Fodder that requires a target before you can play it. Goblin Assault, which can make an additional goblin token every turn, but forces all your goblins to attack. Goblin Assault is the type of card that you want to pair with sacrifice engines or sacrifice effects, because often that 1/1 goblin's just going to die along with your other goblins. But if you can use that goblin for something every turn rather than just jamming it into your opponent, it's going to be quite good. Not to mention it's really good on an empty board. If your opponent can't do anything about it and has no creatures to block, Goblin Assault can take over a game very quickly. And then we also have Burning Tree Emissary here, which obviously first thing that comes to mind is this is not a token creature at all, but they do work very nicely in this strategy since they're essentially a free creature that can also chain together with other Burning Tree Emissaries. You'll notice that Burning Tree Emissary used to be an uncommon and was put down to common here, and I think it's for this archetype specifically, where you can flood the board with more creatures than your opponent can handle and then overrun for the win, and Emissary does a great job of letting you do that, or at least enable in plays where you can get more creatures on the board. We also have the sacrifice payoffs here, with Vampire Aristocrat being a must-block creature if you have a big enough board. Being able to sacrifice at instant speed with no mana abilities is great, and so Vampire Aristocrat is the type of card you need to turn a bunch of tokens into a huge hit. Be careful. Don't use this effect. Don't use this effect unless you're winning the game with it, or unless you're the creatures you're sacrificing are going to die or completely useless or something like that. Just sacrificing creatures to make like a 10/10 isn't worth it if your opponent's just going to be able to chump block it. You want to be able to do this mid-combat when your opponent has very few ways around it, and force them into a situation where maybe they have to block it, and then in those situations you can convert some of your tokens into actual damage, or into at least a trade, or a trade down with an opponent's creature. So Aristocrat is the primary sacrifice outlet here and has the potential to win the game, but I think a lot of people are overestimating how good it's going to be in this format. We also have cards like Golgari Rotworm, which is just a sizable creature on its own, but again, for a black mana, it can turn a token into a damage, and if you are very, very heavy on tokens, or if you have cards like Goblin Assault and you're able to use that token every turn, then Golgari Rotworm turns into what you need to finish the game. Like I said, a lot of times these token decks can get in there for a bunch of damage, but they need a way to close out the game. Maybe your opponent's left at 5 life, and your tokens just aren't going to be able to deal that damage through your opponent's blockers. So a card like Golgari Rotworm can help finish off the deal here. Null Zombie, very similar, a little bit more mana intensive, but along the same lines as Rotworm, this can help convert your tokens into damage while also gaining you a little bit of life. And then also Falconwrath Noble, which isn't a sacrifice engine or a token creature, but works really nicely in token decks or any deck that wants to be sacrificing creatures, since it turns those die-in tokens into damage, but also gains you life, similar to Null Zombie here. The reason Noble is just a solid card in this deck is because it gives you the option to attack with all your tokens, and either A, your opponent doesn't block and takes all that damage, or B, they do block, kill your token, and they lose life anyway because of the Noble, which is pretty nice here. It's just Blood Artist. It's the more expensive older cousin of Blood Artist, but it does his job pretty nicely. What else do you need to prioritize? Well, mass pump effects, or as I keep calling them, overruns. The type of effects that take a little bit of damage, add them to all of your creatures, and thus add 1 billion damage to your board all at once. This is how you want to be closing out the game. Make a board of tokens and then use one of these effects to make it so that you're just adding too much damage to the board and your opponent can't keep up. Your opponent can't block everything. They have no choice but to take all the damage. We have cards like Torrent of Souls here, which doubles as a reanimator spell, but we're really focused on the +2/+0 on everything. It is nice that this brings a creature back and then also overruns your board. It doesn't give trample, and most of these don't, but it does add enough power to the board. The reason Torrent of Souls and effects like this are good, you can see by just demonstrated. If you have 5 tokens on board, this adds 10 power to the board, which is enough to close out a game very often, and then the reanimator tacked onto that can give you the reach you need to finish up. Gruul War Chant is a little bit more clunky. It doesn't do a lot unless your board's already huge, but it gives all of your creatures menace when they're attacking, meaning that they require double blocks, and it gives all your attackers +1/+0. So a lot of times this will add 4 to 5 power to your attack, but the menace is really important, meaning your opponent, if you are the go wide token deck, you should almost always have more creatures than your opponent, and being able to force a double block with 2 power creatures means a lot of times you'll be able to at least trade off for one of the blockers, or your opponent will just be left in a situation where they can't block at all. Strength in numbers is a little bit different than the last two, since it takes a huge board and it converts it into a bunch of damage on a single creature. A lot like what I was talking about for the aristocrat on the last slide. Strength in numbers does require a lot of creatures to be attacking for it to be useful, but it helps destroy opponent's blocker in combat, and it also gives trample, which is pretty important. If you have a bunch of creatures and you just somehow need to force in one of them, you can attack with a bunch of things and then strength in numbers the creature that needs to get in, often for a pretty big boost, and trample to guarantee that you're dealing damage. Scourge Devil fits nicely in the Unearthed deck and this deck at the same time. When it enters the battlefield, it gives a tiny little overrun, +1/+0 until end of turn. You can't do it at instant speed, so it's a little bit of a hello, this is what I'm doing type thing, similar to Torrent of Souls or any sorcery speed way of doing this. But Scourge Devils is a nice little way to top off your curve in this kind of deck, giving your entire team a tiny little boost, and then the Unearth ability gives you the option to do that again at a later turn. Dyna Charge is pretty good here. It has a little bit of flexibility in that you can just play it as a 1-mana spell, but honestly, if you're doing that, Dyna Charge just isn't really that good. You really want to overload it where it becomes 3 mana, all creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn. Or we often see this in the form of Trumpet Blast, where all attacking creatures get +2/+0 for 3 mana. Dyna Charge is ideal for this situation because it is an instant. Your opponent has to play around it, and since people aren't going to be drafting this set very often, people may not be aware that Dyna Charge is even in this set. So you can set up an attack where it just looks like you're trying to get in small amounts of damage, and Dyna Charge can actually just win you the game. I think this is probably one of the overrun effects that you really want for this deck. I think it's actually better than any of the other cards I've listed so far here. Dyna Charge is deceptively strong in a go-wide token deck. We have Gaia's Anthem, which is very good. The color-shifted Glorious Anthem, I want to say. Just gives all of your creatures a static +1/+1. So now anytime you make a 1/1 token, you're getting a 2/2 out of the deal instead. Not to mention there's not a lot of enchantment removal floating around, especially not in people's main boards. So it's very likely that you'll be able to stick this and have a permanent +1/+1 anthem for your creatures, meaning that I guess I don't really have to explain why that's good, right? 2/2 tokens instead of 1/1s. You're doubling your damage output. You're going to get the reach you need. You're able to trade off on creatures, maybe 2 toughness creatures more often, and it's just all around good. This is a staple for the archetype, and you would pick up pretty much as many as you can, even though once you get past the second copy, it's a little bit clunky, but it is an uncommon, so you won't see many of them anyway. And then I wanted to mention some splash cards here, which aren't ideal because they're not on color and they require, well, that's the same thing as saying not on color, but Intangible Virtue. I mentioned this in the Selesnya deck, but if you're ever in a strategy that has just tons of token, we're talking about at least half your deck being token generation, or at least copy spells for tokens, populate, so on and so forth. Intangible Virtue is insane. It basically functions as an even cheaper Gaia's Anthem, and I just gave that card a lot of praise, but it also gives your tokens vigilance, meaning you don't really have to worry about blocks. Tokens make great blockers, but they also make great attackers if you're pumping them, and being able to do double duty and attack while also leaving back a bunch of tokens to block seems like an unwinnable race for your opponent. Teleportal is a weird card. It's not a bad card. Basically, it says 5 mana. All of your creatures get +1/+0 and can't be blocked. So it is a finisher for this kind of deck, but it is blue as well, which makes me question why Teleportal is in this set in the first place, since it doesn't really fit into any of the archetypes that we've mentioned. But if you're able to splash blue at 5 mana for your token deck, Teleportal should be a nice way to win the game. Finally, the key rares we want to look out, or pre-finally, since we have another slide after this. Wart, the Raid Mother, not only does she generate tokens, but she gives you that option to conspire any of your red or green instants. So if you are casting something like Dynacharge and you have 2 spare tokens back, which, you know, Wart, the Raid Mother makes those 2 tokens for you, you can close out the game pretty easily here. Raid Mother as a 6-mana 3/3 doesn't look impressive just on paper, but it's really 5 power and toughness, and that conspire ability is fantastic if you're in this sort of archetype and you have any sort of instant sorcery based overrun effects. We also have Craterhoof Behemoth, which at 8 mana is very costly, but I don't think this format's so slow, or I'm sorry, so fast that you shouldn't be able to cast this. And if you have a big enough board when you play Craterhoof Behemoth, it's just game. And I mean that, like, Craterhoof Behemoth is a game ender the turn it comes down if you have the board to support it. Zealous Conscripts, I mentioned this, I believe, in one of the other videos, but this is good anytime you have sacrifice effects, probably the Unearth video where I mentioned it. If you have any sort of sacrifice in your deck, Zealous Conscripts gets a little bit of extra value because you can steal your opponent's creature for the turn, attack with it, and then sacrifice it before your opponent ever gets it back, which is just a really nasty thing to do. Hellrider is insane. Hellrider is actually just a very fantastic card. All around, but in token decks, Hellrider is the absolute bee's knees. It turns all of your creatures into instant damage, whether your opponent blocks or not. So you attack with Hellrider and 4 creatures, 4 tokens. Your opponent's automatically taking 5 damage, and that's before they even get to determine whether or not they block and take combat damage. Hellrider is a must-kill if you see it in a token strategy, and the fact that it has haste means that sometimes you're not even going to be able to do anything about it. And finally, Basilisk Collar, which is just an all-around good card. You would play this in almost any deck that has creatures, but the added bonus of Basilisk Collar in a token strategy is that once you get to the point in the game where you're no longer able to just attack with all your tokens, maybe your opponent's actually set up a pretty sizable board state and their brick wall in your tokens, this lets you equip to just a 1/1 and make sure it guarantees damage or trades off with anything that blocks it. So Basilisk Collar is cheap enough that it fits in this strategy and also efficient enough that you can just tack it onto a token and make sure that it's being able to attack, whether it gets blocked or not. Either it deals damage and you gain a tiny little bit off lifelink, or it gets blocked and you trade off with the Death Touch. Finally, how do you beat this archetype? Well, it should be pretty apparent if your opponent's going wide and you have sweepers that you have a little bit of an advantage over them. Cards like Bonfire of the Damned, which is just insanely good as is, but even smaller things like Vithian Stinger, Pyroclasm, Cower and Fear, things that deal small amounts of damage but spread it out, can really damage your opponent. Cower and Fear is particularly nice against this strategy since it takes out, I don't know, pretty much everything. But keep in mind, if your opponent has one of those Anthem effects, Cower and Fear and things like Stinger go down a little bit in value. You need to really get these down on the board early and control how many tokens your opponent gets out before they play their Anthem effects. Pyroclasm is a sorcery, and it does hit your creatures as well, but it's pretty good regardless, and it does get through at least one Anthem if they have it on board. We also have cards like Olivia Voldaren, which, again, is a game winner. Olivia Voldaren is a 5 out of 5 bomb-type creature. It is insanely good, but notice that it's 1 in a red ability, pings creatures, and grows Olivia. So this is the ideal mythic rare bomb to have against it, since you can just ping off tokens while also growing your bomb. Niv Mizzet, Niv Mizzet is, again, I don't know what's up with the blue-red cards in this format. They're all very weird. They don't seem to fit anywhere. Niv Mizzet doesn't seem like the type of card that fits into any archetype that I've mentioned in this entire series. But for blue and red, you can deal damage to a creature, and that just shuts down the token strategy. It's very similar to Olivia Voldaren. If your opponent's playing tokens, you have a Niv Mizzet on board. You want to get it down as soon as possible, and you want to just start picking off tokens as much as you can. And then finally, Fiery Justice, or any similar card that can take damage and spread it out, is going to be good against this strategy. Fiery Justice, in particular, is just a good card. It seems like it has a pretty big drawback on your opponent gaining 5 life, which, yes, it does, but, I mean, you're still going to play Swords to Plowshares with your opponent gaining 4 or 5 life. Right? If you can pick off multiple creatures, especially in response to them trying to pump their board, Fiery Justice is going to put you in a pretty good spot against them. So with that being said, I appreciate you guys watching all of the videos. This brings an end to the series here. I hope this has been helpful for most of you guys, and I hope that when you draft Modern Masters, these videos have given you an idea of how you should be approaching the format. Just to kind of sum up really quickly, try and stick to a shard. Try and stick to a 3-color combination. If you end up seeing that you're moving into a kind of 4 or 5-color strategy, try to pick a shard that overlaps as well, or 2 shards that overlap, and leave out the 5th color. So for example, if I see that I have a bunch of Bant cards and a bunch of Esper cards, I can be happy about that, and I'll try to stay out of red since those 2 colors overlap in blue and green, or I'm sorry, white and green. I can have black as a splash and blue as a splash and try to stay completely out of red. That way I can make a succinct little 4-color deck. Another way to approach this format, and maybe this is just a video, a separate video altogether if you want me to do it, is one tip is be on the lookout for the uncommon 3-color creatures, the ones that I've mentioned in every video. There's an uncommon 3-color creature in each shard, and those seem like a pretty good sign that that color is open, or at least that's what I noticed from my one draft. Probably too small of a sample size to really say that, but anyway, if you guys want me to make some sort of video on a couple tips here on how to draft this format, or things you should be looking out for when you are drafting and deck building, then please let me know below, and I would be happy to do that. Granted, keep in mind a lot of people aren't going to be drafting this more than maybe once or twice, but I'm going to be drafting as much as possible because it's insanely fun format from the one draft I had. And anyway, thanks for watching. I'm done rambling at the end of this video. I appreciate you guys spending your time here today. If you have any comments or any corrections that need to be made about any of the card evaluations that I've put here, please leave a comment below. And if not, feel free to like and comment and subscribe anyway. I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with me. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. My name is Timothy, and I will see y'all next time.